I too would like to acknowledge the Indigenous custodians of this land, and as a historian and a professional historian, I'd also like to acknowledge that there are different ways to interpret history, and that anybody's history can be seen from different perspectives. So there's no one who's right and there's no one that's wrong when you're talking about history. It's a matter of your own interpretation of what you see. Some things are quite factual, like an Act of Parliament is an Act of Parliament, it's there. A number of deaths that you can prove, a wage, something like that, it's factual, you can't argue with it, but lots of other things you can, and that's what history is really all about. What I want to do as quickly as I can at the start is just to give you a little bit of a historical overview of the 19th century. Danny this morning talked really about 20th century history and took you through that. Some basic things to try and sort out. You get different figures of the numbers of South Sea Islanders. People have been talking about 50,000, 60,000, etc. The number that the Queensland government would say came here is 62,475. But that's not individuals, because we know that some people came more than once. Some people came twice, a few came 3 times, some people went to different colonies, somebody gone to Fiji, some just went to Queensland once, different patterns. So that probably the figure which is closer to correct is something like 50,000 individuals. But the actual, if you look in the government records, you'll see 62,000. Of those people, they're about 95% male. So the women that came over, very small numbers, are only about 5%. And we've talked this morning about where people came from, primarily from New Hebrides or Vanuatu and the Solomons, but also from the islands that are now within Papua New Guinea, from the Loyalty Islands, which is within New Caledonia, from Fiji, but only from Rotuma in Fiji, and from Kiribati and Tuvalu, which used to be called the Gilbert and Ellice Islands. So that's the origins of the people that came here. And if I can sort of gesture with my hands, you've got a developing frontier going up the Queensland coast. There's settlement, European settlement goes on and on. You've also got a frontier which is going up through the islands. And if you can imagine 807 voyages coming out of that Queensland frontier, like Brisbane, Maryborough, Bundaberg, Mackay, Townsville, etc., going across into the islands like this, 870 of them. And this frontier is really beginning in the 1860s for sugar and going through to about the 1890s, 1900s, moving up the coast. Roughly the same sort of thing is happening in the islands, because it begins in the Loyalty Islands and the New Hebrides in the 1860s, moves up to the Solomons by the 1870s, up to the islands off New Guinea by the 1880s. Then that's where really some of the worst excesses are. They're pushed down out of there, back into the Solomons and what's now Vanuatu for the rest of the time period, and they're also locked out of the Loyalty Islands, the New Hebrides. So that's 2 movements that are going on there. Another general thing, and I think we've been halting and talking about people from the past. One of the most astounding figures about that group is that 15,000 died in Queensland. 15,000. That's about 30, it depends how you calculate it, but it's 25 to 30% of the people that came here died here. They never went home. And it's because of lack of immunity to what are common diseases like common cold, measles, things like that. There was no immunity for people from the islands. So when they hit those diseases here, they died in very large numbers. And if there was ever a reason why this whole process should have been stopped right in the 1860s, it was the government knew the extent of those death rates. And they didn't stop it, they just kept using the labour. Something, and I'll sort of end here because I don't want to go on any further, one thing that comes out of this, of course, is that the Queensland government set up a fund called the Pacific Islanders Fund, which was to look after the wages of deceased islanders and supposedly send them back to families in the islands. They didn't. They sent back they used about 16% of that money, and the rest of it they kept. for administrative purposes, and in the end, the Commonwealth government used that money for the deportation in 1906, 1908. So the wages of the dead paid for the White Australia policy. I think that's enough.